All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now gonna, this is actually gonna be the last chapter, the last video of the chapter. And this actually isn't, what we're gonna talk about actually isn't in the book or on the website, at least right now. I may just have to make another version of the book and add it later. But this is just a theory of mine, so it's highly speculative, highly theoretical. So a lot of my theory, I'd like to think at least that I think it through a lot and sort of establish it in a way that matches up with experience and reports and things like that. I haven't really done that with this. This is just me kind of throwing it out there, right? So I haven't developed it very much. I just kind of started thinking about this. I can poke holes in it and sort of see inconsistencies. And I try to do that with all my theories. I try to point every hole and every inconsistency and every error, right? Some contradiction. I do that all the time, right? And I do it a lot, and whatever's left, I presume to be probably closer to the truth. So I haven't really done that much with this concept yet. So I'm basically just putting it out there, right? So I'm always theorizing about everything, right? So this is kind of something I'm theorizing about right now. It's not super developed, but what the heck? Up to this section in these recordings, up to these ideas, so I just figured I'd include it in the recordings. So like I said, highly speculative, highly theoretical. There's still holes in it, but I'm just throwing it out there. And, I may come back to this and develop the theory more, or I may not care about it and just never come back to it. But I'm just throwing it out there. Think of it what you will. So what I want to talk about is the concept of life force and kind of like the definition of life as I've come to understand it. Now, where this kind of idea came from and what inspired it to a degree largely was my experience with Jesus, right? So I've had a couple experiences with Jesus. I've only had one, which was the most amazing. That one I talk about toward the end of the book, because that's when it happened. It happened really around the time I finished the book. So then I added it right to the book. So I could talk about it now, or I could have talked about it when we were actually talking about God in chapters 3 and 4. But I figured I'll just save it to the end to keep it aligned with the book. But like I said, I had multiple experiences with Jesus. I think everyone has experiences with Jesus, but this one was really special because it was, I'll talk more about it later, but suffice it to say, I saw Jesus in his, he has different, what I call glorious forms. I've heard someone else use that term. I kind of copied it from them just to be clear. But he has different forms, right? He can appear to you really in any form, but he has forms that increase in glory. So he showed me one of his really glorious forms, and it is really amazing. Right? I'll talk more about that experience later. But one of the things I really, really got the sense of, I picked up immediately from being in Jesus' presence, was the feeling of life coming from his spirit, right? So you can't miss it. It's like one of the first things you notice, right? I mean, there's many things you notice about his presence. But one of them is just the feeling, the abundance of life. It's just emanating from him, right? And so when I was in his presence, when he showed it to me, like I said, one of the first things I picked up on, there's so many things I was thinking about during that time. But when I look back on the experience and I think about it, I feel like, yes, that it's like, we think of life as like we associate it with the almost like a substance or energy that allows our body to live, right? So you can have a very physical, you don't need a supernatural definition. You can have a very physical definition of life, which just has to do with the cells and things like that. When you have a certain metabolic activity in your body and it's adapting and it's digesting, it's just doing certain things, you could say it's alive, right? And a lot of us, we sort of inform our definition of life on the basis of the biological definition of life. But when I saw Jesus, and by the way, this is also coming from experience, I think it was a vision of heaven, right? So I say it that way. I'll talk about that more later. I'll talk about that, when I actually talk about my experience with Jesus. So before I mentioned how I had experience of hell, which sucked, right? That was my recent one. I had a vision of hell in my dream. And then I don't think I mentioned these videos. A few days later, I actually had a vision of heaven, which was wonderful. That was magnificent. That actually reminded me of my experience with Jesus. And when I combined those two experiences, it changed my definition of what I think life is, right? Because like I said, when you see a subconscious form, right, it inspires you, right? Socrates calls it recollection. I just use the term inspiration. But if you see a particular if you see an arrangement pattern that's a good approximation of a particular subconscious form, you will become inspired to produce a form intention that more accurately or more purely causes your subconscious to switch to a particular frequency. So that's what happened when I saw Jesus, and when I had that vision of heaven, I got a much better understanding of what life is, right? In other words, how our subconscious defines the term life, right? Because Jesus is just overflowing with life, right? And I know it might not make sense, but once you're in his presence, you'll know what I'm talking about, right? He's just, life is flowing out of him, right? It's like a sun, right? Like a sun is overflowing with heat we'll just say heat energy. Jesus is like a singularity where he's just endlessly flowing. It's like a nuclear explosion of life and positivity and love. It's amazing, right? But what I felt from him was that feeling of life. But also when I had that vision of heaven, I got a sense really of what it feels like, the feelings of when you're in heaven, just like I had a sense of the feeling of being in hell, which sucked. So I talked about, I believe that was in chapter, was that 4? I talked about the feeling of being in hell, how it's like you're 100% negative, right? Again, if you haven't experienced it, you just don't have a reference frame to know what I'm talking about, right? On your worst day, you still feel good compared to how it feels there. You feel fear, you're not calm. You feel like this new unlocked mega super fear. But in heaven, it's the opposite. Everything's the opposite in heaven, right? And as you would expect. But what I gathered from heaven, right, from a vision of heaven, is that you have more life. You're more alive there than you are here. Way more, right? And even the term, like we would say, let's say I die and go to heaven, right? We might think it appropriate to say something when you're in heaven to say, oh, I died on earth. And that might seem to, well, what's wrong with that statement? From my experience, right, I now feel like the term death is a huge misnomer compared to what's happened, the term death and life. Because we associate death and life with the body. We use these terms to describe states of the body, right? When the body is functioning, normally we say, not normally, but when it's functioning in a certain way, we'll just say alive, right? It has life in it. And then when it's no longer functioning, metabolic activity ceases, things like that, we say it has death. But that's not the complete meaning of death and life, at least as defined by the subconscious. That's the conscious mind making up a definition and sort of, it has an arrangement pattern that's a little bit similar to the way subconscious defines it, but it's definitely not the full definition. What I kind of learned from these experiences, or what I feel and theorize now, is that the more complete definition of life has absolutely nothing to do with the body, right? It really doesn't, right? It's completely irrelevant to that. Life and death are phenomena that are associated with the spirit, right? The body just participates in that activity to some degree, but no, life and death have meaning without the body at all, right? And the spirit can die even though it's still existing, right? Because we think of death as like being non-existent to some degree, right? So if some atheists, right, of course, and I don't know if anyone else believes this, but the atheist would generally think that if you die, you cease to exist, which is complete. I'm not even going to say it, right? But they actually believe that, right? Literally everyone else, I imagine, believes or knows that there's obviously more after death, right? But some people, like I said, it's pretty much just them. They think that when you die, you cease to exist. But that's not the definition of death at all, right? By the same token, we think life is when you're alive in the body, and you die when you go to heaven. No, right? You actually, based on my experience of heaven, you actually get more life in heaven, right? It would feel so weird in heaven to say you died, right? Or you experienced death, because you absolutely didn't. It doesn't even make sense, right? It's such a misnomer. It would feel so inappropriate to even use a word like that. How could you even use the term death when you have gotten more life in you, right? You have life in your body, now you got more life. It makes no real sense to even use the term death. It's like, I just feel like it's an inappropriate word. And so from these experiences, I've kind of gotten a sense of what life really is and what death really is. And so what are the definitions and where does it come from? So that's kind of what I want to go through here and kind of just establish it. So to go over this first point, it says the spirit is elemental and requires sustenance just like the body. So I mentioned that a little bit before. So what do I mean by the spirit is elemental? Excuse me. So the spirit, when I say the spirit is elemental, what I mean is it can't be broken down into further parts, right? In a sense, it's indivisible. Excuse me, in a sense, it's indivisible as it is, right? So it is the most basic form. Your spirit has a very fundamental basic form that it can't be put into a lower or different form or other. It can't be broken down, in other words, into other forms, right? And in that elemental state, it has certain, almost like spiritual organs, right? So your body has organs, your cell has organelles that do different things for the organ. And I believe your spirit has something similar, it has different vehicles or faculties that are innate to your spirit, right? That's how God made you. You can't take them away. You can't lose them. They can't be broken down further, right? Like your body has organs, but it can be broken down further, right? If you lose an organ or something, the spirit is not like that. It has something like organs, but you can't lose them. They can't be broken down further. They are elemental, right? Now, part of what your spirit requires, and this is something that I think might be a bit of a different way of thinking for a lot of people, but I believe the spirit requires sustenance, right? Just like our body, right? So if our bodies require sustenance in the form of food and water and sleep and things like that, really just food and water in terms of the energy. Well, I'll explain that more in a little bit, but let's, for the moment, we'll just say it requires sustenance in the form of food and water, right? Your spirit is the same way, right? It actually requires sustenance. Now, if you don't get food and water, you're not getting energy into you, right? You're not getting a significant amount of energy into your body, and so you start to feel tired, and you're going to start to decay. You're going to start to die because you don't have energy to sustain you. That's how your spirit is. Now, even though your spirit's immortal, right, can't be broken down further, it still requires sustenance. It requires a type of energy to sustain it so that it has life in it, right? So it has energy and it can do things. I believe your spirit can actually get tired. I think it can actually get hungry and thirsty as well, right? And that happens when it doesn't have sustenance. So the spirit actually needs sustenance. A lot of people think or believe, and I'm not saying I know, this is my belief as well, but a lot of people believe when you die or when you're in the spirit that you don't feel tired at all, that you're completely energized, and that those are just concepts related to the body. I don't think that's true, right? I think the spirit actually needs sustenance just like the body, right? And if it doesn't get it, it's going to get tired and it's going to get weak. So, to go over this next point, which I think I went over some of this already, but it says the spirit has organ-like faculties that make use of life force by converting it for different uses. So actually, I didn't really go into it. I'll say one more thing. So the sustenance that your spirit gets, right, is what I call life force, right? So I meant to say, I forgot the order I was doing this in, but what I meant to say is what is the sustenance that your spirit uses? What is this thing your spirit sort of ingests, like your body ingests food? What is this thing your spirit ingests to sort of activate itself or have energy or have strength, right? Well, that sustenance is life, right? Or life force. And this is what I felt just emanating from Jesus Christ, right? So in the Bible, it talks about that, right? I really understand. I felt like I really understood those terms in the Bible when he say that Jesus is, they're different references, but basically associate him with eternal life. And I believe there are certain passages, like I said, I'm still reading the Bible. I really need to read it. I'm reading it from front to back, so not just picking and choosing different scriptures. I know a few different scriptures, but I want to read it from front to back. So right now I'm up to Exodus, so I'm making progress. But I believe there are certain parts of scripture that compare Jesus to like food and water for our spirit. And it's so true, right? We have eternal life through him. But what we need, what life really is the thing that sustains our spirit, is the energy of our spirit. It's like food for our spirit. So that's what life is, or you could just call it life force. So now what happens when your spirit gets... Now we're going to talk about where your spirit gets life force from. So we talked about it a little bit before. You gather it when you're sleeping, but we'll talk about it a little bit more later. So what happens when your spirit actually gets life in it, or gets life force? And that's kind of what I mentioned here. I believe the different faculties or organ-like vehicles in your spirit, they're able to convert that life force, right? So they're able to use that life force and convert it for different uses. So one of those uses is actually healing, right? I think your spirit also needs to heal, right? So that's another thing a lot of people might disagree with, or they're not used to thinking of things in those terms. But I believe your spirit can actually get damaged. Now, again, it's immortal, so it can't die in the way we normally use the word, which means going out of existence, right? That can't happen. But your spirit can still go to less and less glorious states, right? So it can become damaged in certain ways. And one of the things that I believe your spirit has something like an organ, right? I don't know if there's words for them, but like in a cell, it would be an organelle. In the body, it would be an organ. I don't know what the word is for your spirit. I just call them vehicles. But I believe your spirit has a vehicle that would use the life force and convert it into a form of healing and in a form of vigor or strength, right? And this allows your spirit to be strong and not feel tired, right? And you feel energized. So I believe that I remember certain near-death experiences, right? Near-death experiences when people are in hell, right? They will look very decrepit, and their skin is gray and just not good, right? So they're in a far less, not just in a state that is not glorious, they're in a more like a cursed state, right? A damned state, the opposite. And what's happening is their body is their spirit's decaying because it has no life in them, right? So in hell, you would actually have death because your spirit has no life. It doesn't have access to this life force. That's what it means to be dead or die. That's the actual meaning of death, the absence of life force in the spirit. And so their spirit isn't able to heal, so it just decays, right? I believe demons are the same way, which we'll talk about them in a little bit toward the end of the video. But yeah, when you're in heaven, it's completely different. So I should mention, when people are in hell, and this happened to me in my hellish experience as well, which I don't know if I have mentioned in that video. When I had my vision of hell, this is the recent one. So I had one years ago, then I had one recently. And the one recently, I was very, very tired, right? So I was weak. I could barely move at all. But there was this demonic entity was kind of violating me in ways that I'd rather not say, right? And I couldn't do anything about it in this vision. I was like this, and I just had to take it, right? There was nothing. I kept trying to fight, but I just couldn't, right? I had no strength, right? And I believe that was in the vision because that's what it's like to be in hell, right? They have no strength. And I've heard of the visions, near-death experiences about hell. Well, they say the people are very, very tired, right? They're extremely tired. They can't breathe. They're always trying to breathe, but they can't. They just have no energy, no strength, right? That's because they have no life force in them, right? The spirit has no sustenance. And when you're in heaven, it's the complete opposite. You're super energized. And not only are you energized, your spirit has healed, right? It has healed from whatever state it was when you were in the body or living in the body. But in heaven, your spirit heals because it has way more sustenance in heaven. I don't know that it's infinite. It's an infinite source. But I don't know, your spirit can hold on to an infinite amount of it. But it probably has like a tank, which is just stays full. So I don't know. But I imagine that because you have a continuous source of life, right, your spirit is able to just heal and is able to become more glorious. So part of the faculty of your spirit, I believe, is healing. It can get damaged and it heals naturally. But I also believe that your life force can be converted into different things. So one of the things it can be converted to is healing and strength and vigor, but it also can be converted into emotions. It can be converted into creativity. It can be converted into beliefs. So these are very abstract uses in a sense. I don't know if emotions are too abstract, but they're just something different. But anyway, right? So I believe that the life force can be converted into different things in the spirit. And what it ultimately comes down to is this next point, and that's that the spirit fundamentally uses life force to create reality. So that's what life does for your spirit, right? Now, I believe that, just like the Bible says, we are created in the image of God. Now, God is the ultimate creator, right? Now, there are many aspects to God's nature, which is he has all truth, all righteousness, all goodness, right? Infinite peace, superior peace to everyone else. But one of the things that God fundamentally is, God the Father, is he's a creator, right? That's one of the most, that's one of the most signature qualities of his nature, is what he fundamentally is a creator. And I believe we're made in his image, and what we're able to do is also create at a lower scale than him, of course, but we create. And life force is what helps our spirit to do that. Our spirit creates, and we create on different scales. So when I'm imagining things, that's still a form of creation, right? When I have a belief, that's a form of creation. When I'm feeling emotions, that's a form of creation. When I move, that's a form of creation. When I'm healing, that's a form of creation. And when I have strength in my spirit, it's a form. So all of these are forms of creation. They're creating on different levels. But what it all comes down to is life force, the life in our spirit. Now, I don't know that just thinking itself requires life force. I'll talk about that a little bit later, because I also have a theory that your body might have a certain level of life force that it produces naturally, and maybe that's the one that allows us to just think and things like that. I'll talk about that in a little bit toward the end of the video. But for the moment, I'll just say that I believe your spirit can use it. Your spirit uses life or life force to create on different scales. It uses life force to create on different scales. Now, one of those scales, which it creates at, is also in the form of basically what we've been talking about the whole chapter, and that's chi. Right? To go over this next point, the high density of matter causes it to require significantly more life force to influence. So now, is life force the same as chi? I don't know. It probably is. So we've been talking about how these terms, term chi, and we talked about chi is the term in traditional Chinese culture. We talked about other terms, prana, asi, which I think is in Nigeria. I think that's how you pronounce it in Nigerian. Mana energy, ether. So there's other ones, but generally these terms mean life force, right? They mean life force, and they're assigned to all living things and things like that. And sometimes they're considered to be a non-living things. But ultimately, these things are life force, which is what I think they are. But but the way I've been using the term chi the whole chapter is just, I'm talking about when you're using this life force, we're just using chi, right? So an energy that comes from your spirit, or your spirit has access to, using that energy to manifest your intention in matter. So that's the context which I've been using the term chi. So for the moment, we'll just say life force is more general. So it's just something your spirit has to create on whatever level. But when we're talking about using your life force to create any form of influencing matter, that's chi. Now, so for example, let's say I want to use telekinesis or something. I can use my life force, convert my life force into a substance that allows me to make matter move. Right now, the problem with that, though, is that the density of matter is extremely dense. So I can use this life force to do things that are more spiritual or more metaphysical in the spirit realm. I can use it to create emotion or build my emotions. I can use it for creativity. I can use it for beliefs, to power my beliefs and creativity and my ability to create. That, you can probably imagine, doesn't take a lot of life force, right? We rarely ever get tired from doing this. It has happened before to me when I'm thinking and I'm so inspired and I'm thinking so many thoughts, it actually makes my mind kind of tired. It could just be my brain. Brain starts to kind of get tired, but it can happen. But fundamentally, I think our life force is more, it can get used up much more if we're trying to use it to influence matter, right? Because physical matter is such a high density, it costs so much life force to be able to influence it. That's why we don't really, it's not clear that we have supernatural sort of abilities or powers, because that's really what would be happening in that case, right? If I use my life force to do telekinesis, it takes a lot of my life force to make a material move. It doesn't take very much to have beliefs and to create and things like that. So I wouldn't notice any issues with that. But yeah, so another thing is if you start using your life force, even though it's demonic, if you start using your life force to do things like telekinesis or astral project and things like that, I think what you would notice is that now this is just a theory of mine, but I suspect you would notice that you get very, very tired or you're getting sick more easily, right? And this is something that I think I have seen, not sure, right? I think I've seen something like that with people who get involved in witchcraft and things like that. I'll talk more about that later, but later in the video, but they're getting so tired because they're constantly using their life force for other things. Now, normally, your life force is being used to sustain your body. Now, your body's physical matter, so it costs a lot of life force to keep your body running. That's why you keep needing more, right? And so we'll talk about where you mostly get it while you're sleeping. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you keep needing more because it costs so much of your life force to keep your body running and to sustain it, because that's influencing matter. Now, when you start using your chi for other stuff, right, then there's not as much left to keep your body running. And so you're going to get tired, you're going to start to get sick, you're going to start to notice problems. And I believe that happens in people who start using their chi for other things, or they're using their life force for other things, supernatural things. And that's just another reason why it's demonic, why it's against the will of God. And you could probably get psychically, I say it that way because I don't know the rules with this stuff. I may depend on what you're using it for. It's good to just err on the side of caution and just check with God first before doing anything. And I think largely if you use your chi on almost anything external, if you're not trying to heal it or heal something living, it's probably just demonic and sinful and pushes spiritual energy away and you'll get psychically possessed. But that's just another reason why that's the case, right? Because if you start using your life force on other things, and like I said, they do this in the occult, they do it for cheap tricks, right? They don't even use it for anything important. They just do cheap tricks like telekinesis or something stupid like that. And I imagine that they would start to get really tired, right? Because there's not enough life force left to support their body. Now, what I want to say here. Oh, so where does life force come from? So how do we get it? How does our spirit gain this substance which sustains it, or life force? Well, to go over this next point, it says life force primarily comes from a special kind of breathing from the spirit. So just like our lungs breathe air, our lungs breathe air. Air helps the main source of energy that we use in our body are aerobic, it's aerobic chemical reactions, which require air. There are anaerobic ones, but that's not nearly as efficient, so your body doesn't really prefer that. You require oxygen, right? So you have to breathe in air. Now, your spirit's the same way, right? It breathes. It's a form of breathing, right? It's not breathing air, but it's a form of breathing. And I believe that breathing is a form of breathing in the sort of life that comes from God, or the breath of God. I believe that our spirit has something like an umbilical cord to God, right? Like a cord. And it has like a cord to God. And through that cord, our spirit breathes, right? And it breathes life. Now, I suspect we do it throughout the whole day, and it's doing it at every moment. So even now I'm breathing in the breath of God, right? But I can't do it as well as when I'm sleeping. So I'd have to think about that a little more, but that's what I think happens, right? So a lot of these ideas are informed by things I've read and seen and experiences I've had. So I haven't mentioned all those experiences, but this is just kind of the sum of all of them. But I believe that when you sleep, right, your spirit is able to breathe much better, right? It can breathe in the breath of God, and it's able to obtain much more life or life force. Right, and then it stores it, right, probably in your dantian area or in your etheric body. So it has a certain amount, and then when you wake up, you feel much more refreshed because your spirit has much more life in it. So it's not just that you can feel tired if your body doesn't have energy. You can also feel tired if your spirit doesn't have energy. Just your body can run low on energy, and your spirit can run low on energy, right? So they're usually in sync, but they are two different things, I believe. So when you wake up, you can feel refreshed in the spirit. Sometimes you can still feel tired in the body, but still refreshed in the spirit. It's kind of a strange feeling. You might feel that way after like working out or something, when your spirit is still tired, but your body is still tired, but your spirit is a bit more refreshed, right? That's because it has more life force in it. So life force primarily comes from the cord primarily comes from God, right? Through the cord you have from God. And I believe, just to kind of stay on this topic, that when you have a relationship with Jesus and when you have salvation, right, and you go to heaven, that you have like a permanent connection to Jesus Christ, and so you have permanent life. You have a permanent life source. So you're permanently sustained, or you have eternal life in Jesus. Now, when you're alive in a physical body, you don't necessarily have that eternal life in Jesus, but you do have life coming from God, and that's through grace, right? So that's just my beliefs. Like I said, I know that's a highly Christian belief, but I just think it's pure metaphysics. I don't see it as a religion or beliefs or anything. I don't see it as religion in that way, but yeah, you have, through God's grace, you have access to that life. Everyone does, doesn't matter how evil you are. As long as you're alive, you have access to his life force. The goal, right, is to, now that life force access is temporary. The goal of life is to get the eternal one, which will survive after the body dies and you lose grace. So you want to have eternal life in Jesus. Now, to go to this next point, I should also mention, when people don't have that and they go to hell, right, then they're actually dead. And I don't really like to talk about hell too much, but sometimes it's important to mention it. I believe when they're in hell, they actually had death, right? That doesn't mean not existing, right? It means that their spirit doesn't have a source of sustenance. It can't get life in it, right? So it just starts to decay. And it's tired, and it can't create in certain ways. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But now to go over this next point, now I believe the main source of life is God, and we get it, well, it's always God, but the main source is getting it through breathing, through the cord we have with God, and that breathing increases while we're sleeping. We could just do it better. But you may also be able to get life force from different sources as well. So to go over this next point, it may also be possible to absorb life force from the environment or food, as well as build up more of it. So I don't know if this is true, but it might be possible to just gain life force from the planet. So we talked about gaining it from plants, right? I may be able to, some people say, I haven't looked into this too much, but some people say plants are alive or they have a certain type of awareness. You can speak to them, right? So it may be possible to just ask a plant, can I absorb your life force? I don't know. Maybe it says yes. I don't know how you would. If it can speak, you would know in your spirit. So any level of intuition, that's what you use that helps you navigate the spirit realm. Again, your spirit's intuition, your psychic abilities aren't all the way turned on. If they're all the way turned on, which we just would say is activating your third eye, then you would be able to know much more in your spirit realm. It would be much clearer to you, I should say. But that's usually illegal, so you don't want to do that. That's going against the will of God. But it's always on a very low level, and I believe you are allowed to use that, and you can't turn it off, and that helps you to discern things in the spirit realm. So you might be able to discern if this plant, is saying yes, right? And if so, you may be able to just absorb chi from the plant, or life force from the plant. And your spirit can convert that into vitality in the body. I think I mentioned it earlier. I don't think I used those exact words, but yeah, so when you gain life force, let's say you're sleeping, you gain life force. So your spirit is breathing in the breath of God. When your spirit actually does, so we talked about how that life force gets converted to different uses. One of the main uses is it gets converted for vitality. So it gets converted into the term we've been using for chi, and it helps to support your body. So vitality, when I say vitality, I just mean chi that's supporting your life in your body. It's keeping your body alive and holding it together. So that's one of the conversions of life force. That's actually the main one that your spirit converts it for, because that one costs the most amount of life force. I believe it takes a lot of life force, a lot of energy to keep your body alive. Your spirit has to support it a lot. But you could maybe possible to also absorb, well, like I think I was saying, you could potentially absorb it from plants. And that the type of chi that comes from plants or life force that comes from plants is easy to convert. We'll talk a little more about what I mean by that in a moment. But you can convert it into life as well. You may be able to take it from the earth, who knows. But it may also come from food. So now I know that food sustains the body. It supplies the material, the biochemical materials that our body needs to run. But that's different from chi, right? That's different from life force, which sustains the spirit. Now, can food actually help the spirit, give the spirit more energy? It's possible, right? And so the reason I say that is because I've read of certain phenomena where a person will have like an organ transplant, right? And you've probably heard of this, where a person will have an organ transplant from someone else. Now, these are probably very rare and very dangerous because your immune system might immediately start attacking this foreign, it'll treat it like a foreign object or substance in your body. So you can really go into a type of shock, if this isn't done right. So I don't know how often this happens. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure organ transplant happen all the time. They try to make sure, it's not so bad. But when you have an organ transplant, some people who have experienced this will say that their personality changes in a certain way, or they now have certain memories, and which are very foreign to them. These memories aren't their own memories, but they feel like they remember certain things, or their personality changes in certain ways. I remember I read a story of a guy who said he just started eating pizza. He started really liking pizza for some reason. He was never really that into pizza before the organ transplant. And what they actually found out was that the person who donated the organ really liked pizza, right? So many people who have just kind of random memories will say that what they're remembering were actually the reported experiences of the person who donated the organ. So, I don't know how common it is, but it's definitely been reported I would say enough times to believe that something's happening here. It's some credible metaphysical phenomena is occurring. Now, what is the mechanism by which it occurs? What I think is probably happening there is that the chi, right, so the chi that was helping the organ run, it's still stored in the organ. We'll talk a little more about those concepts in the next chapter and in chapter 10, but it's still in the organ. And so when you put it in another body, what I think interesting, there's something interesting I think happens, which I forgot to mention. I haven't mentioned it yet. When you put that organ in another body, right, and blood starts flowing through it, it's like your subconscious starts transcendentally connecting to the organ. Now, your brain didn't do that. Your conscious mind didn't do that connection. It's more like your body did the transcendental connection, right? So your body did something like a transcendental connection to the organ, and now that organ is now affecting your subconscious because you're connected to it now. Now, what would cause your physical, and I've thought about this, right? This is just me kind of putting stuff out there that I haven't thought too much about. But what would cause your physical body to sort of transcendentally connect to an organ? Do I just throw something in my body and now my subconscious is connected to it, right? So it's an interesting question I've asked, and I imagine that part of it occurs when blood runs through something, right? Now, it doesn't just happen then, but I think with organs, when blood runs through it, and they say there's life in the blood, so I think a lot of our chi and vitality is carried through the blood. It kind of makes sense if you think about the way I talked about meridians, how they flow through different organs, and so does blood. So blood may carry a lot of that energy or be associated with it. Again, we'll talk a little more about those concepts in chapters 9 and 10. But I think that when blood runs to the organ and starts supporting it, your body starts to connect with it as a result of that blood. And the energy, you can say the chi or the life force stored in the organ, it's trying to manifest or express itself in a certain way, right? And when your subconscious connects to it, your subconscious will imitate that expression. And manifestation can occur on the scale of how it's trying to run specifically, but it can part of the way the energy in the organ manifests is also just in the form of information, right? It can manifest in the form of memories in terms of desires or memories and desires and things like that, because you are still producing those intentions as you go about your day, right? And your chi, to some degree, is going to try to manifest that intention. Now, your body dampens it a lot so that it's not manifesting in some weird way and interrupting your vitality, but it's still there in a residual way. Now, we don't notice it very much because our body, the energy doesn't change instantly in large amounts, right? It's very gradual because we always have our same organs, right? But if you put a new organ in someone, there's going to be an immediate change, right, in the energy, right? It didn't gradually change or gradually drop. It's just a whole new scale of energy, and that would really only happen when you do organ transplant. So when you transcendentally connect to the organ, and your subconscious starts to imitate it, and your organ's trying to manifest these intentions, these residual, and it's a very low level of manifestation. I believe they're very residual that just happens as you go about your day. But when your subconscious starts to be influenced by it, it's manifesting or it's behaving or expressing itself in a way related to what the organ is manifesting. Or I should just say, like, the information stored in the chi in the organ. Because what the organ is technically manifesting is still just supporting the organ itself. At least the chi inside the organ is what it's mainly trying to do, right? But within that chi is also stored the memory. So it's manifesting kind of like information, experience, things like that. And so, which the subconscious can pick up on and sense. You can sense it in your spirit, and the subconscious would cause the transcendental connection to organ would cause the subconscious to kind of imitate it in certain ways. So that's kind of a nice sense of how it would work. But that would ultimately be why people have certain memories, or their personality or their behavior changes, right? So the chi stored in the organ that is influencing how the subconscious behaves, right? So yeah, I think so. That's why I think it's possible that you can gain chi from food. Well, in that case, it was an organ, but that demonstrates that chi can be stored in substances, especially biological substances. Now, in that case, we were talking about blood going through the organ, but it could also just happen from trying to absorb food, right? So when you eat it in your stomach. So, like I said, I'd have to think about it a little more. But if that's true, it would tell us that eating meat is probably not great for us in terms of our chi. So it'd be okay, it'd be fine in terms of biological material. But the chi that's stored in food probably would not be great for supporting vitality. Now, the reason I say that is because what are the memories associated with the muscles that we're eating in these animals, right? Or organs, right? If you eat like kidney and things like that, right? It's going to be what the animal is feeling. So one, it's going to be very primal, right? So it's not going to be sophisticated or full of peace and love and things like that. They're animals. I know some animals are very peaceful, especially pets and things like that. We don't eat pets. We eat cattle, right? We eat livestock. And they, I imagine, are very primal. They don't think of love and peace and things like that. They're very wild, right? But on top of that, because we have a horrible agricultural industry that really engages in abuses against animals and things like that, these animals know nothing but fear and panic, right? Majority of their lives, not all of them, but chickens and things like that. At least not all meat comes from these kind of abusive industries. I know that there's some which are highly rated and they try to protect the animals and do everything in a more merciful way. But for the industries that don't, right, and they're very abusive to animals. Some chickens, from the moment they hatch, right, they're just subjected to a horrible, torturous life where they know nothing but panic and fear, right? And all that panic and fear, right, they're producing would be stored in their body, in their blood, in their muscles. So when you eat it, it's possible that chi, you're now transcendentally connecting to that food or that the chi or the energy stored in those muscles, right, or organs, and it causes you now to be, it causes you to have an affinity for fear and panic, or just something negative, or there could be other aspects of chi that we're not sort of acknowledging, right, that could disrupt the the conversion of chi or life force for vitality in the body. So, like I said, just throwing it out there. I'd have to think about it more and come up with examples and analyze contradictions and things like that. I haven't done that with this really much yet. But that's just something that's interesting to think about. So it might come from food. Now, an interesting question I have, so I want to now switch gears a little bit, is I want to talk about now negative entities. So just to go over this next point, which is just a question, do negative entities have life force? So this was something I've thought about, because if we think about it, I was talking about how in hell, so this was also my vision of hell, right? A lot of times people report that the people there have no strength. They have no strength. They don't really have an ability to move. They can't do much. They're very weak. So they have no, and I'm saying that's because they have no life force in them. But the demons aren't like that, right? Now, presumably, if God, now, based on this theory, right, God is the source of all life, right? And I think that's kind of obvious, right? God is the source of all life, so if you're cut off from God, you won't have any life in you. That's a form of death. That's spiritual death. But the demons, I believe, are also cut off from God, right? And they should have spiritual death. So why aren't they super weak in hell and things like that? Why can they still move around and influence people? The humans in hell can't do that. So that's something I thought about. So that would be a contradiction to all of this. So I thought about it. Why are people weak but in hell but the demons aren't? Why is that constantly reported? I had a vision basically saying the same thing. The only thing I can think of, right, and so I thought of there's two possibilities to this. One of them is that our spirit actually has almost something like a mitochondria, right? So it's kind of like a spiritual mitochondria, right, which is the organelle in a cell. That's really like, it's like the part of a cell that helps, it's like a power plant of a cell, right? It's constantly producing, supplying energy for the cell. It's possible that your spirit has something similar. There's a component of your spirit that's responsible for producing energy or life force without necessarily God, right? It's just a part of the elemental component of your spirit. It's always producing at least a certain amount of life on its own. Now, it's possible, actually, let me just read this point because I kind of went into it already, but the answer I got, so the spirit may have a mitochondria-like vehicle that is different for different spirits, right? So in other words, our spirit may produce a certain amount of life on its own, but different spirits may produce different amounts of it on their own, even if they're not connected to God. So demonic entities may produce way more life force than a human, and a human may produce a very tiny amount of life force on its own. So we absolutely need God, right, to have any type of movement or strength or anything. Right, and I'll talk a little more about that later, but in a moment. But so yeah, that's one possibility. So when spirits, humans are in hell, right, because our spirit produces such a tiny amount, we're just going to have no strength at all if we end up cut off from God. But demons and fallen angels, their spirit naturally produces a lot more than us. So even if they're cut off from God, they can still use that little bit of life force they're producing, at least compared to God, to still move around and create on different scales and things like that. So they're not quite as weak as us. And probably part of the reason for that is that we're meant to live a certain way in the physical body. So if our spirits were too powerful, it just wouldn't work, right? We would have too much knowledge, we'd have too much supernatural ability, we'd be able to create on a large scale much more powerfully in a way that just wouldn't make sense to what our purpose in life. Excuse me, so like for example, if you put an angel in a human body, they'd have too much power, too much knowledge, the dampening effect of the body just couldn't suppress all that power, and they would start using supernatural abilities all the time, right? So they wouldn't be able to gauge any purpose of life, at least in the way that we are, which is why angels, as far as I know, don't have life. They're not able to be alive in the human body. Our spirit is so weak on its own that it makes it possible. All God has to do is just supply a certain amount of energy or life force to our spirit, and that makes everything work. Demons, fallen angels, however, they don't have physical life, but they can produce a lot more of the energy on their own, or life force on their own, even if they're not connected to God. So that's one theory I had. What was the other thing? Oh yeah. So now the other theory that I had, so this is the second one. Now this is not necessarily mutually exclusive from what I was saying about them having a spiritual mitochondria, which is self-sustaining to some degree. So both these things, that I haven't said the second thing yet, but both of them may be true or it may just be one of them. So the second thing that I was thinking about to answer that question of why people seem to be extremely weak when they're cut off from God, which is in hell and demons aren't, is just, I'm just going to read this point. This life force may potentially have two different forms: positive life, or a positive life force, or negative life, or anti-life. So those are interesting terms, right? What do they actually mean? Well, so I was actually thinking about this, and I was thinking about how, so I was talking about before about how chi manifests according to what it's going to do, or what it's going to try to manifest is related to the quantization of your subconscious, right? So that's a form of quantization, and it's related to the frequency of your subconscious, right? So if you're on a negative frequency, like anger, your chi is going to manifest in some way we would consider as negative. If it's on a positive frequency, it can manifest in a way we consider it to be positive. So life in the body is a positive form of manifestation, right? So that's why when you're in a good mood, right, you notice your body it's able to be vital in an easier way, if I'm saying that right. So you notice that it's easier to be a little healthier. Your inflammatory responses are reduced, and your body overall just seems to function better when you're in a good mood. When you're in a bad mood, it causes stress, and it doesn't function as well. That's because the negative frequency is dampening the manifestation of chi. So chi for the purpose of vitality. But if we kind of think along those lines a little bit more, we can kind of break chi into two kinds in a way, based on usage. In a sense, it's still the same chi, but we can say that there's positive chi, which is chi that's used to manifest in a positive way. Then there's negative chi, which is used to manifest in a negative way. In Qigong or Tai Chi culture, however you would word it, they believe that when you get sick, I could be wrong, I didn't look this up, I remember reading about this years ago, so I could be misremembering, but they believe that when you're not healthy, right, it's because you're low on chi. But I think chi is conserved, right? So what goes in comes out. So it may not necessarily be that you're low on chi, it's that you're low on positive chi, right? And so, to be fair, you could use your chi for other things and just be low on chi in general. But if you're not using it for other things, which would be more of a supernatural thing, then you could just be low on positive chi. And that's why it's harder for you, that's why you're not healthy. If you're high on negative chi, right, that's just going to manifest negative stuff in your body, and it's going to cause what we call stress on the body. So if we expand that concept to life in general, or life force, right, you could probably say that there might be two types of life force, or two kinds of life: negative life and positive life, or sometimes I just call it life and anti-life, right? Now life in general comes from God, so it comes from God into our spirit. We breathe it in, but I think our spirit can also convert it into a more negative form. So spirit, life force is almost like oil, right? So oil is just in a very general, not usable form as it is, but it's precious because it can be converted to different forms. So oil can be converted into different forms for usage, to be converted to energy, to supply energy to subsystem, but your life force is the same. It could be converted to do different things. So we talked a little bit about that here, but it could also be converted to, you can also sort of break down the category or categorize it in two main ways and say it can be converted into a more negative way, and it can be converted into a more positive way, right? And so, and that's where the concept of life and anti-life come from. So your body and your etheric body and your spirit naturally converts life from God into a more positive form, right? And that helps your vitality and things like that. But you may also be able to, through your intention, convert it into a more negative form. And so I believe that, or it's possible, I should say, that when you think negatively, and you constantly think negatively, and you have, let's say you're very hateful, you say how much you hate other people, and you're very angry, and you want to do this and that, what's actually happening is your spirit's creating on different, we talked about the spirit creates on different scales, and that'll make a little more sense based on what we talk about in chapters 9 and 10, because then we're going to talk more about the law of manifestation. But your spirit creates on different scales, but it's creating negatively. So what it's actually doing is your life is being converted, your life forces in your spirit is being converted to anti-life, so that can create negative things, or create a negative reality, or create in negative ways. Now, why is that important for this? That the question I asked earlier. Well, to go to this next point, I believe, and I pretty much kind of ran out of space here, but I said that negative entities may be able to absorb a negative life force from us and animals, right? So not super important for animals, but that's a possibility. So this is something I've thought about, right? And so this might be where demonic entities actually get that energy from. So even though they're cut off from God, right, it may be possible that they can absorb energy from us. They can absorb our negative life, right? So now I believe demons or negative entities also have a subconscious. Now their subconscious, I don't think it can switch to a positive frequency like ours can, right? So they're cut off. They can only have negative frequencies. By the way, when I had my vision of hell, that's also how it felt. I couldn't feel anything positive at all, right? And so, like here, where you think of something negative, positive, your subconscious just switches that frequency and you start feeling it. The energy starts charging. Right there is the complete opposite. Like if you think of something positive, nothing happens. Your subconscious doesn't do anything. Now, at least that was my experience. So I even talked about how after that vision of hell, I was trying to charge spiritual energy, so I focused on Jesus and started trying to charge the energies. It felt like I can feel some energy rising and the energy would just stop right here. It wouldn't go further. It took everything I had, right, to kind of make it go a little bit further, and then just wouldn't. Oh, I should mention, there was another experience I had, which I'm going to talk a little more about later, but like when you're coming to God, right? So I talk in the book, I believe I mentioned this in the end of the book, where I talk about stages of your relationship with God, which I talked a tiny bit about it, or I talked about it a little bit in chapter 4, but I wanted to cover a lot of these concepts before I talk about it in a more full form. So that's why I didn't mention it too much yet, and I save it to the end of the book. But I talk about in those experiences how there was one time where I did something that I shouldn't have, and God warned me about it. And when I did it anyway, I felt His presence removed from me. I felt it right away. Right after I did it, right, I felt His presence removed. And it was a horrible feeling. It felt like death, right? So that's another thing that experience also informs my definition of death, because that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like pure death, right? It felt like my spirit, it's hard to describe it. It just felt like my spirit didn't have life in it. Now, I knew it wasn't all the way. I shouldn't say it didn't have any life in it. I knew it wasn't, He didn't remove His presence all the way. And that was really scary, because I didn't know if I was going to feel His presence come back, right? I had no idea. It came back, luckily, after a couple of days. And they say in the Bible, God chastises those He loves. So that's actually what He will do. If someone's trying to come to Him, I talk more about this later. I'm kind of going into it now, so I'm skipping ahead a little bit. But if someone's trying to come to God and they keep falling back into sin, He will help you get out of that. And sometimes He does it through tough love. So in some cases, He will do it by removing His presence from you so you see what it feels like. And it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling. But when I felt that, I felt like I understood death, what that really is what death is in the spirit. So yeah, that was just my experience, which I wanted to mention. But going back to this, I believe that it may be possible that these negative entities can feed on negative life or anti-life. Now, when we sin, right, when we're constantly sinning, and we're doing things that are bad, our subconscious converts our life force into a negative form or negative life. And that damages our body and things like that. God's Spirit is unable to move in our life in the same way because of that sin, which is the opposite of what He is. in terms of actions and character and things like that. And so I believe when we sin, we give us a form of consent, right? So we talked about the importance of consent in the spirit realm. When you sin, you consent to creating in a way that is opposite God's nature, right? And so you're creating, this will make a little more sense based on what we talk about in the next 2 chapters, but you're consenting to the influence or creating with demonic entities, because they live in the realm of sin, right? And so when you constantly sin, you lose spiritual energy. They transcendentally connect to you. And I believe as part of that transcendental connection, they can siphon negative life from you, or anti-life. And that anti-life actually makes them more powerful, right? It gives them more sustenance for their spirit, but it's negative sustenance. So they're going to be more hateful or more lustful or more whatever. But also they could actually use that same life force energy to manifest more negative things, right? And so this is why, in terms of manifestation, they can manifest negative things in your life. They can manifest negative things in society in general. And this is all part of the spiritual attack or spiritual warfare that we talked about in chapter 5. I think they can actually put more and more of their negative life into some manifestation. If they put a lot of it into some manifestation, then that... We haven't talked about these concepts too much, so I'm going to talk more about the superconscious mind in the next 2 chapters, but they can put more manifestational energy to ensure that some type of reality or some type of outcome manifests, right? So in other words, for example, if they have a lot of this negative life, this anti-life from people, and they absorb a lot of it, they can use it to manifest. They can basically throw it into reality and say, I want this society to be full of murder and hate and racism and all that. And the more they have, the more reality experiences kind of like a push toward that state where it has that. So in other words, negative entities basically farm us, right? So they basically farm us like animals, and they want us to constantly live in sin, so we're constantly producing negative or anti-life energy, right? Or we're constantly producing anti-life, because that's the type of life they can absorb. They can't absorb positive life because their subconscious can't switch to a positive frequency. And that's actually why I mentioned that story before, because when I had my hellish experience, I could not switch to a positive frequency no matter what I did, right? And that's how I believe demonic entities are. They cannot switch to a positive frequency, so they can't use positive life because you have to be on a positive frequency to use it and do stuff with it, and use it to manifest. They can only manifest anti-life, because they can only be on a negative frequency. So if you have anti-life energy, I believe they can absorb it and they can start manifesting negative things. So they need us to live in sin. They feed on war and hatred and evil in general, evil behaviors and sinful behaviors, and that just makes them more powerful, and it gives them more energy, and the more they get, the more they use to keep it going. They basically farm us more and more, so it's like a form of spiritual farming. And I believe demons, fallen angels do this, and also aliens, right, or gray aliens. Because like I said, I've had a couple of dreams with them, and every vision or every dream I've actually had one the other day. Every dream I've had about aliens that God has shown me, they've all been negative, extremely negative. None of them are even a tiny little bit positive, right? They're always evil, right? I know there's some people who talk about aliens and that they're positive and they help us, and there's the Pleiadians and all that. From God, what He has shown me is that it's always evil, right? So I don't know, but I feel like He's going out of His way to actually show me them as well as like regular demons. So I think they also exist. I don't know. They seem to be on some other team or some other bracket. So there's like the regular demons, the fallen angels, there's the gray aliens. I don't know how they all work together or what, but it seems like they all kind of spiritually farm us for our anti-life. And they want to keep us in a state of negativity, so we keep producing the anti-life energy that they can absorb, and their spirit gets the saint. Their spirit has strength, or it's stronger, and they can manifest and control reality more. They can only control it to manifest negative things, but I guess they still have some form of control that they like. Now, another thing is that they can build up, so this is all theoretical, right? I believe they can build up their anti-life like a battery, right? They can store it. Now, we might be able to do something like that too with anti-life or positive life or just life. But I don't think we really know how, if it's possible. But even if we could, it's not really important for us and our purpose. Our job is just to focus on God, have a relationship with Jesus, and kind of work through the power of the Holy Spirit. We don't need all this supernatural stuff, all this other supernatural stuff outside of them, right? You need Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, you're good, right? They're the ones that try to do everything through supernaturalism, but they may be able to store more. So even if their spirit produces a certain amount on its own, which is much higher than ours, and they can probably only, once they're cut off from God, they can only produce anti-life on their own, but they still might be able to gather more if they pass their normal amount based on farming us and absorbing our anti-life energy. So if they hold on to a lot, I believe that what's also possible, and this happens in witchcraft and the highest levels of magicians and black magicians and things like that, they can transcendentally connect to some demon or many demons, right? And they connect to them, and the demons may be willing to give them that anti-life energy to manifest certain things, right? They can manifest their reality, they can use that to get money or women or things like that, but they can also use it for magic, right? They can use magic in terms of spells, curses. They can probably engage in transmutation or alchemy and actually influence matter. Now, influencing matter requires a huge amount of energy, life force energy, whether it be life force or anti-life. It requires a huge amount, and it's not free, right? So I think they don't like to give it up too much, but they'll do that for the highest level magicians, because they're constantly using that energy and their own manifestational energy to just help them destroy society and help them to farm us. So they're the black magicians and the occultists, they're the spiritual collaborators, right? They collaborate with the enemy to help them farm us for energy. They'll be destroyed and their spirit will be destroyed in the process. Some of them, I think, even know that, or they, like Aleister Crowley, I think actually knew that he was going to go to hell for doing this, but some I really don't get it. Some of them actually don't care. They just I don't mind it. Right? That's so strange. But God gives them that choice. If that's what you want, you can choose that. I suppose it doesn't make any sense, but you do have free will. But yeah, some of them don't mind the deal, right? They collaborate with these demons. Demons will give them anti-life energy to help manifest certain things. And they can use it for money, women, materials, things like that, or magic, right? And I believe that, they can do largely supernatural things from getting the anti-life energy from these demons. What else did I want to say? I think that's pretty much everything. Now, like I said, the angels, not the fallen angels, the actual positive angels and positive spirits, they're not cut off from God. So they all are still connected to God. So they don't have to siphon energy from anybody. You couldn't do that on a positive frequency anyway, because those frequencies are based on actually respecting people and other beings and their sovereignty. All of them just have a connection to God. So they're still connected to the source. So they can just absorb positive life or positive chi or energy from the source, and they never have to worry about that. The negative beings who are cut off from God, they have to fight for energy and steal it from people and things like that, and they can only manifest negative events, right, using anti-life. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to mention, is that I believe the black magicians and whatnot, they can use the anti-life they get from these demons to perform kind of fake or false miracles. And I thought about it, because I'm like, can anti-life, if it's a negative form of chi, can it manifest something that looks like a miracle? Because sometimes demons will give people the power to heal others, right? So it's not the power from the Holy Spirit, which is from God. This is demonic power, but it's performing a fake miracle. So I thought about it, can it still do it? And I was thinking about it, maybe, because it depends on the rules, right? If I hold the intention to deceive someone by healing them, then my chi would probably still manifest a phenomenon related to healing if it's in the context of deception, right? I couldn't really do it actually to help someone. So I can only do it if my goal is to heal. So there's certain rules based with it, but you might be able to, based on it, but you might be able to use it to perform fake miracles if it's still for destroying someone in some way. So I think that's what demonic entities do. And it's funny because there's one story I remember. Now, I have heard of stories of people who have had contact with demons and have been able to use the magic they get from them to heal others. I think the people aren't fully healed. Something always goes wrong. But there's a story I remember reading of this guy, Magus in Java, right? Which I didn't read. I watched a short documentary about it on YouTube. But so if you haven't heard of that story, if you're into the chi energy field and things like that, you probably have. So that's an interesting story of this guy. I should have looked it up, right? But it's some guy, I think, in Java, somewhere in the Southeast Asia area, I think. But there's some guy, and they did a documentary about him who he seemed to have magic powers, the power to heal others and do things with his chi, very supernatural stuff. And he was talking about, they talk about doing things in terms of yin and yang and mixing them or something like that. And they're very sort of surprised about all the magic he can do and how does he do it. And there's this kind of theory about what he does. And I'm like, I don't believe in any of that, right? I guarantee you that's a demon, right? So like, I don't know like all the rules. Again, all this is highly speculative. I haven't experimented with chi very much, right? Because again, it could be very dangerous to use this stuff, and you want to make sure you use it legally, and God has to approve it, and all types of things, right? Best to really just stay away from this stuff and just focus on your relationship with God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus Christ. But when I heard that story, not initially because I hadn't developed these theories yet, but when I thought about it more recently, I'm like, that's definitely a demon, right? Because I remember in the video I saw, something happened where he did something that he kind of, I think, hurt someone by accident because he was showing off with his supernatural abilities. And then he said that his ancestor, that's part of the long con, right? So we talked about the long con that demons engage in. They'll appear as someone else to get you to focus on them and communicate with them, so you transcendently connect to them, so you get psychically possessed, right? So he said his ancestor appeared to him in his dream and kind of told him not to do that. You shouldn't hurt people or show off, which they could care less what you do. I mean, they're just playing along with some type of con, so you continue on with it, right? So if they pretend to be upset with you, you'll think it's more legitimate. And so he said that happened in his dream, and then he woke up kind of upset because he was showing off his power. And I'm looking at this. This has all the telltale signs of a demon, right? There's 100%, I believe that guy is involved in demons. He's involved with demons and involved in witchcraft, right? Because people, that's kind of why I'm teaching this stuff, or why I think God wants me to still teach this stuff. Because, if you don't know how this stuff works, because in the video he talks about the balance between yin and yang, and I think yin is spirit and yang is earth or something like that. If you mix them in different amounts, you get different outcomes. I believe it's all nonsense. What does that even mean? What's the fundamentally the only thing you're going to be doing is using your intention, right? You're not going to be doing anything externally. I don't know how else you're going to change things in your body or in your spirit using anything but your intention. So you're only going to be using your intention. Now, if you understand how the subconscious works, yes, you're going to be doing different things with the subconscious. You'll enter a transcendental state. You can engage in different subconscious actions and things like that. But fundamentally, the framework of how you're always going to use it is the framework that we've been working with, right? And this concept of using using yin and yang in different amounts or whatever, right? I don't know what his theory is. I don't know if he set up a theory. I don't think he did, because that's usually how it works. That's almost always how it works with witchcraft and these entities. They always make it sound like it's some type of fleshed out theory, and it has a strong theoretical foundation that's built from the ground up. Like I said, I think in the beginning of these videos, when you have a theory, you start off with a very basic premise with certain axioms, and you build a whole foundation based on very simple axioms. That's how physics works, Newton's theory, that's how quantum mechanics works. That's how I believe I set up this theory based on basic axioms about the subconscious, right? And they never really do that with witchcraft and metaphysics and all that stuff. Ultimately, what it always comes down to is contacting some spirit or some spirit guide, right? They'll make it sound like a million other things. You do this and you do this and you do this. But in the end, you're always actually going to your spirit guide to help you do this, right? So I think that's what he does, right? He may not say it. I don't think that was said in the documentary. I think that's really what's happening, right? Is he's actually just going to some spirit who's helping him to do this, right? And so I just mentioned that to say that that's what happens with the magicians, or the black people engage in black magic or white magic, right? So if you use your spirit guide helps you to heal others, right? And you're using their spiritual power to heal, that's just from deception, right? I believe they can still use anti-life to heal others because it's in the form of deception. So, yeah, that's basically what white magic is. So yeah, I think I pretty much covered everything. Like I said, I know it's a little all over the place. I haven't fully fleshed out the theory yet. This is just something I thought about recently, was just on my mind. Like I said, I may come back to it and clean up the theory, look for the contradictions, which I know there are definitely a couple of contradictions in it. I may look for them and try to figure out the theory that makes everything I'm observing work, but takes away the contradictions, because that's how I make theory. But I haven't done it. I may just not come back to it at all and not care about it. But yeah, I just wanted to put it in there for those who are interested in these ideas. Like I said, I'm always theorizing about everything, right? And this is the latest one. So, excuse me, so this is pretty much the last video of this chapter. In the next video, we're going to move on to chapter 9. So we're pretty much getting close to the home stretch of the whole course. And we're going to move on to a new kind of formalism, and we're pretty much going to now talk about the metaphysical realm. But yeah, that's it for now, though. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.